My name is Robert Lowe, but everyone calls me Grandpa Rob. I'm 65 years old, and on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life, the day I celebrated both my birthday and 38 years of building a business with my best friend, everything changed. I walked into the office like I had thousands of times before, but this time the sign outside didn't say Davis and Lowe. It said Davis Enterprises. New logo, new website, new contracts. My name erased. Then my business partner of nearly 4 decades looked me in the eye and said, "You're slowing down. I'm taking full control. I'm going to tell you what they did to me. How the man I trusted like a brother took everything we built together and made it his overnight." But before I begin, please let me know in the comments, where are you watching this from? To everyone here supporting this community, thank you. Your messages keep me going. And if this is your first time here, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. You're not just joining a channel, you're joining a family that believes no one should suffer in silence. Now, let me tell you my story. It was March 15th, my 65th birthday. I remember the date because it was supposed to be special, not just because I was turning 65, but because it marked exactly 38 years since Jim Davis and I shook hands in that little diner on Route 9 and decided to start a landscaping business together. 38 years? Think about that for a moment. That's longer than some marriages, longer than most people stay in one career, longer than it takes to raise a child from birth to adulthood. Twice. I woke up that morning feeling good, really good, the kind of good you feel when you've built something meaningful with your life. My wife, Sarah, had made my favorite breakfast. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, real butter. She'd bought one of those number candles, 65, and stuck it right in the middle of my scrambled eggs. We laughed about it. 38 years with Jim, I said, cutting into those eggs. You believe that? Sarah smiled, but I caught something in her expression. A hesitation. A flicker of something I couldn't quite read. "That's a long time, honey," she said. "A really long time." I should have paid attention to that tone. Should have asked what she meant. But I was too caught up in my own nostalgia, too busy feeling grateful for the life Jim and I had built together. See, Davis and Lowe wasn't just a business to me. It was proof that 2 young men could start with nothing, and I mean nothing, and build something that mattered. We started with one beat-up pickup truck, a trailer that shook so bad it sounded like it was falling apart, and enough ambition to move mountains. Literally. We moved a lot of dirt over the years. I drove to work that morning the same route I'd taken for 38 years. Down Maple Street, past the Henderson place where we planted those oak trees that are now taller than telephone poles, past the elementary school where we installed that playground garden that still blooms every spring, past a dozen other landmarks of our shared history. The coffee was still hot in my travel mug. Sarah always made it just the way I like it, strong enough to strip paint but smooth enough to drink black. I was humming some old song, probably something from the 80s when Jim and I were young and hungry and foolish enough to think we could conquer the world one lawn at a time. I pulled into our parking lot at exactly 6:45 a.m. I've always been early. Jim used to joke that I was so punctual you could set your watch by me. "Rob's here," he'd tell the guys. "Must be 6:45. But that morning, something was different. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine still running, staring at our building. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The building looked the same. The parking lot looked the same. My usual spot was empty, waiting for me like it had every day for decades. Then it hit me. The sign. Our sign. The green and gold sign that had said Davis and Lowe Landscaping for as long as I could remember, was gone. In its place was something sleek, modern, corporate-looking. Black letters on brushed steel, Davis Enterprises. I turned off the engine and sat there in the silence, coffee growing cold in my hands. Davis Enterprises. Not Davis and Lowe. Not the partnership we'd built together. Just Davis. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the sign company screwed up an order. Maybe Jim was planning to surprise me with a new sign for the anniversary and they delivered the wrong one. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But as I sat there staring at those cold steel letters, something in my gut told me this was no mistake. This was deliberate. This was planned. This was the end of something I'd given my life to. I got out of the truck on unsteady legs and walked toward the building, toward whatever was waiting for me inside. The key still worked. That should have been reassuring, but somehow it made everything worse, like I was being allowed into my own life as a guest, not as someone who belonged there. I pushed open the door and immediately knew I was walking into a different world. The familiar smell was the same. Coffee, paper, that faint scent of fertilizer that never quite leaves a landscaping office. But everything else had changed. New letterheads stacked neatly on the reception desk. I picked up a sheet with trembling fingers. Davis Enterprises, in the same corporate font as the sign outside. No mention of Lowe anywhere. My name, my identity, my 38 years of sweat and sacrifice. Erased as if I'd never existed. The business cards were next to the letterhead. I'd helped design our old cards back in 1991 when we finally felt successful enough to have something more professional than handwritten estimates. James Davis and Robert Lowe, partners, they used to say. Now they just read James Davis, owner and CEO. Owner and CEO. When did Jim become a CEO? We were partners, we were equals, we made decisions together, split profits down the middle, shared the load when times were tough and the victories when times were good. There was no owner. There was no CEO. There was Davis and Lowe. Or there had been, until sometime between when I left work yesterday and when I arrived this morning. I walked deeper into the office, past the filing cabinets where we kept 38 years of contracts, past the wall where we'd hung photos of our biggest projects, the municipal building landscaping that won us the county award, the residential development that put us on the map, the memorial garden we donated our time to build after 9/11. All the photos were still there, but they'd been rearranged. The ones featuring both of us had been moved to less prominent positions. The ones showing just Jim meeting with clients, just Jim accepting awards, just Jim cutting ribbons. Those were now front and center. It was like someone was rewriting our history, editing me out one photo at a time. The contracts were the real gut punch. I found them stacked on Jim's desk. Our desk, the desk we used to share when space was tight and money was tighter. The Morrison account, the one we'd been chasing for 6 months. The city park renovation that was supposed to be our biggest contract this year. The suburban development deal that would set us up for retirement. All signed, all sealed, all under the name Davis Enterprises. My signature line had been whited out on every single one. Not crossed out, not marked through, whited out as if my approval had never been necessary, as if I'd never been part of the decision-making process, as if 38 years of partnership had been reduced to a clerical error. I sat down heavily in what used to be my chair and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. These contracts represented months of work, meetings I'd attended, clients I'd pitched to, estimates I'd calculated based on jobs I'd bid with my own experience and expertise. The Morrison job alone was worth $340,000. I'd walked that property 3 times, measured every square foot, calculated the grade changes, specified the materials. I'd sat in their living room drinking coffee and convincing them we were the right team for the job. We were the right team. Davis and Lowe. But according to these contracts, there had never been a Lowe. It was all Davis. Jim Davis, sole proprietor, owner, CEO, the man who somehow managed to build a successful landscaping business all by himself. I picked up the phone to call Jim, then realized I didn't know where he was. Usually by 7 a.m. he'd be here too. We'd go over the day's schedule, split up the job sites, coordinate the crews. It was our morning ritual, had been for decades. But this morning, there was no "our" anymore. There was just his business, his contracts, his success story. I was still sitting there trying to process the magnitude of what was happening when I heard his key in the lock. The same key sound I'd been hearing for 38 years, but this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like the owner coming to check on his property. The door opened and Jim Davis walked into what used to be our shared life like he owned the place. Because apparently he did. "Rob, you're early." Jim's voice had that artificial cheerfulness you hear from salespeople and politicians. Bright, professional, carefully modulated. Not the voice of a man talking to his partner and oldest friend. He was wearing a suit. A real suit. Not the khakis and polo shirts we'd worn to client meetings for decades. This was expensive. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, with a tie that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. When did Jim Davis start dressing like a Fortune 500 executive? "What is this, Jim?" I held up one of the new business cards and I hated how my voice sounded. Shaky, old, defeated. "Ah, you notice the changes." He walked to the coffee maker, the same Mr. Coffee I'd bought in 1998, and poured himself a cup from the pot I'd made yesterday before leaving. He added cream and sugar with the casual confidence of a man who wasn't about to destroy someone's life. "Changes?" I stood up, the business card crumpling in my fist. "Jim, my name is gone. 38 years, and my name is gone." He leaned against the counter, sipping coffee like we were discussing the weather. "Look, Rob, we both know this has been coming for a while. You're slowing down. The business needs to evolve, and frankly, you've been resistant to every modernization I've suggested." Resistant to modernization. Like that time I questioned spending $50,000 on software we didn't need. Like when I pushed back on his idea to expand into 3 new counties when we could barely handle our current workload. Like when I suggested maybe we shouldn't take on debt we couldn't service if we had a bad season. "We're partners," I said, and even as the words left my mouth they sounded hollow. "We make decisions together. We've always made decisions together." Jim set down his coffee cup and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Rob, that handshake deal we made in 1986? That was fine when we were kids playing at being businessmen. But this is a real company now. We have employees, contracts, liability. We need clear leadership." "Clear leadership? I've been leading jobs since before you knew the difference between topsoil and compost." "And you've done good work," he said, his tone so patronizing I wanted to throw something. "Really good work. But times change. Clients expect digital presentations now, not hand-drawn sketches. They want project management software, not spiral notebooks. They want to deal with executives, not guys who still have dirt under their fingernails. Dirt under my fingernails. 38 years of building something with my hands, and he made it sound like a character flaw. "Besides," he continued, walking to his desk and shuffling through papers like this conversation was just another item on his to-do list, "you'll be much happier in a consulting role. Less stress, more time with Sarah, no more worrying about payroll and insurance and all the headaches that come with running a business." "Consulting role?" The words felt foreign in my mouth. What the hell is a consulting role? You'd work on specific projects, bring your expertise to jobs that need your particular skill set. Think of it as semi-retirement with benefits. I stared at him. This man I'd known since we were 27 years old. This man I'd trusted with everything I had. This man who'd stood next to me at my father's funeral and promised we'd always have each other's backs. "You want to make me an employee," I said slowly, "in the company I helped build. I want to give you a graceful transition into the next phase of your life." "And if I say no?" For the first time since he'd walked in, Jim's mask slipped. The friendly executive facade cracked and I saw something cold underneath. Something that had maybe been there all along, waiting. "Rob, let's be realistic here. You're 65 years old. You don't have the energy you used to have. Half our clients are asking to deal with me directly because they're tired of waiting for you to get up to speed on technology. The Henderson project ran 3 weeks over because you insisted on doing things the old way." The Henderson project. where I'd personally planted 47 trees because their original landscaper had used the wrong species and everything was dying, where I'd worked 12-hour days in 90-degree heat to save their investment, where Mrs. Henderson had hugged me and said I'd saved her dream garden. "I fixed the Henderson project," I said quietly. "You fixed a problem that wouldn't have existed if we'd used proper planning software from the beginning. But you fought me on that upgrade for 2 years." I felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates moving after decades of pressure. This wasn't a conversation between partners. This wasn't even a negotiation between employer and employee. This was a verdict being delivered by a judge who'd already made up his mind. "So, what are you saying, Jim? After 38 years, you're just done with me?" He walked around the desk and put his hand on my shoulder. The gesture was meant to be comforting, I think, but it felt like a claim of ownership. "I'm saying it's time for both of us to be honest about what this company needs to survive. And what it needs is clear decision-making, modern systems, and leadership that can take us into the future. Leadership that doesn't include me. Leadership that includes you in an appropriate capacity." I shrugged off his hand and walked to the window. Outside, I could see the yard where we stored our equipment, the mowers and trucks and trailers that we'd bought together, piece by piece as the business grew, the shed where we kept the tools that had built hundreds of beautiful spaces for families and businesses across 3 counties. All of it now belonged to Davis Enterprises. All of it now belonged to him. "I need time to think about this," I said, not turning around. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Rob..." I heard him moving behind me, gathering papers, settling into his routine like this conversation was already over. "The new structure is effective immediately. I've already filed the paperwork with the state." I turned around slowly. "What paperwork?" "LLC reformation. Davis Enterprises is now the legal entity. Davis and Lowe Landscaping was dissolved last week." Last week, while I was visiting my grandkids in Portland, while I was taking a few days off for the first time in months, while I thought I was taking a well-deserved break from the business we'd built together, Jim Davis was literally erasing me from existence. "You dissolved our partnership while I was gone?" "I streamlined our corporate structure to better serve our clients and employees." Corporate speak. After 38 years of plain talk and handshake deals, he was speaking to me like I was a stranger at a business conference. I walked toward the door, then stopped. "Jim, do you remember what you said to me in 1994, when we landed the municipal contract?" He didn't answer. "You said we were partners for life. You said what was good for one of us was good for both of us. You said we'd built something bigger than just a business. Rob, you said we were like brothers." I waited for him to respond, to show some sign of the man I'd known and trusted and worked alongside for nearly 4 decades. But he just stood there in his expensive suit, holding his coffee cup, looking like a stranger who happened to have my business partner's face. "Happy birthday, by the way," he said as I reached for the door handle. I walked out without another word, leaving behind 38 years of my life and the man I'd thought was my friend. I don't remember getting in my truck. I don't remember starting the engine or backing out of the parking lot that had been my second home for 38 years. But somehow I was driving, and I wasn't heading home. I was going to Mel's Diner on Route 9, the same booth where Jim and I had planned everything back in 1986, where we'd sketched our business plan on napkins and dreamed about being our own bosses, where we'd celebrated our first $10,000 month by ordering the most expensive thing on the menu, chicken parmesan for $8.95. The diner hadn't changed much. Same cracked vinyl booths, same smell of bacon grease and coffee that had been brewing too long. Same waitress, well, not the same one, but they all seemed to come from the same mold. Tired eyes, comfortable shoes, and the kind of patience you only develop after years of dealing with people at their worst. I ordered coffee and pie. Apple pie, because that's what Jim had ordered that first day when we were scared kids pretending to be businessmen. The waitress brought it without asking if I wanted ice cream. She must have seen something in my face that told her I wasn't in the mood for choices. Sitting in that booth, I tried to remember when things had started to change. Not today. Today was just when the mask came off. But when had Jim Davis stopped being my partner and started being my boss? Maybe it was 1994, when we landed that municipal contract. The biggest job we'd ever done, worth more than we'd made in our first 5 years combined. I remember Jim handling most of the presentation while I focused on the technical specs. "You're better with the dirt," he'd said. "I'm better with the suits." It made sense at the time. We were playing to our strengths. But looking back, I wondered if that was when the divide started. Jim talking to the clients, Jim signing the contracts, Jim becoming the face of Davis and Lowe while I stayed in the background, literally dirty, digging holes and planting trees. Or maybe it was 2003 when we incorporated. Jim had pushed for it, said we needed the liability protection as we grew. I'd trusted him to handle the paperwork because, again, he was better with that stuff. I signed where he told me to sign, filed what he told me to file. Did I even read those incorporation documents? Did I understand what I was agreeing to? The coffee tasted bitter, but I kept drinking it anyway. Each sip brought back another memory, another moment when I'd stepped back and let Jim step forward. Another time I'd chosen to trust instead of question, to collaborate instead of compete, to be the partner instead of the boss. 2008 nearly killed us. The recession hit the landscaping business hard. People were mowing their own lawns and letting their gardens die rather than pay for professional maintenance. For 8 months, I didn't draw a salary. I told Jim I'd rather see the business survive than worry about my paycheck. "You're more flexible than I am," he'd said. "Michelle and I have the kids to think about, college funds to maintain. You and Sarah are in a different place." A different place. Like being in our 50s with a mortgage and aging parents was somehow easier than being in your 40s with teenagers. Like my financial needs mattered less than his. Like I was the expendable partner. I should have seen it then. I should have demanded equal sacrifice, equal pain, equal skin in the game. Instead, I'd been proud of my flexibility, proud of my ability to tighten my belt for the good of the business, proud of being the partner who could be counted on to put the company first. What a fool I'd been. The pie was too sweet, but I ate it anyway while I thought about all the other times I'd been flexible. All the times I'd worked weekends while Jim went to his kids' soccer games. All the times I'd taken the difficult clients while Jim cultivated the easy ones. All the times I'd said, "Whatever you think is best," when we disagreed on business decisions. I thought I was being a good partner. I thought I was building something together. But I was really just training Jim Davis to see me as the junior partner, the hired help, the guy who did the dirty work while he made the real decisions. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "How was your birthday surprise at work? Jim said he had something special planned." Jim had talked to my wife. Jim had told her he was planning a surprise. Sarah's hesitation that morning. She'd known something was happening. She'd been expecting me to come home happy, excited, grateful for whatever surprise my business partner had arranged for my 65th birthday. Instead, I was sitting in a diner eating pie and realizing that the man I'd trusted like a brother had been planning to betray me for God knows how long. And he'd been confident enough in his plan to tell my wife about it in advance. I paid for the coffee and pie and walked back to my truck. The sun was getting higher, and somewhere across town Jim Davis was probably settling into his new role as sole owner and CEO of Davis Enterprises, probably making plans for the business he'd stolen, probably feeling pretty good about how smoothly his corporate coup had gone. But as I drove home to face Sarah and figure out what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life, one thought kept circling through my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sarah was waiting for me in the kitchen when I got home. She'd made lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, the same comfort food she'd been making for me since we were newlyweds. But when she looked at my face, I could see her realize this wasn't going to be a celebration. "Oh, honey," she said, and those 2 words contained 42 years of marriage, of knowing each other so well that explanations weren't always necessary. What did he do? I told her everything. The sign, the contracts, the dissolution of our partnership while I was visiting our grandkids. The way Jim had stood there in his expensive suit, talking about appropriate capacity and clear leadership, like I was some kind of problem to be managed. Sarah listened without interrupting, her soup getting cold while I emptied 38 years of frustration and betrayal onto our kitchen table. When I finished, she reached across and took my hands. "I'm so sorry, Rob. I knew something was wrong when he called last week." "What exactly did he say?" "He asked if you were planning anything special for your birthday. Said he wanted to coordinate with you on a surprise. I told him you'd probably just want a quiet day, maybe dinner at Romano's like we always do." She paused, looking guilty. "I thought he was planning something nice. Maybe a bonus or a vacation or a retirement party," I finished for her. "He was planning my retirement party." We sat in silence for a while, both of us trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Sarah had never worked in the business, but she'd lived with it for 38 years. She'd packed my lunch when we couldn't afford to eat out. She'd answered the phone when clients called at all hours. She'd listened to me worry through every tough season and celebrate every success. In a way, Jim Davis had stolen her life's work, too. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah was breathing peacefully beside me, but I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything I should have done differently, every warning sign I'd missed, every moment when I should have stood up for myself instead of going along with Jim's decisions. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and went to my office, the spare bedroom where I kept all my business files, boxes of records going back decades, tax returns, contracts, employee files, equipment receipts, the paper trail of a business built from nothing. I started pulling out files, spreading them across the floor like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. If Jim thought he could erase me from Davis & Lowe history, he was about to learn just how thorough my record-keeping had been. The first box contained our incorporation papers from 2003. I read every page this time, slowly, carefully, with the attention I should have given them 21 years ago. Most of it was standard legal language, but buried in paragraph 7 was something interesting. A clause about partnership dissolution that required unanimous consent of all partners. Unanimous consent. Jim couldn't dissolve our partnership without my agreement. But somehow he had. I kept digging. Tax returns showed equal ownership percentages through 2019. But starting in 2020, the percentages had shifted. Jim's ownership increased to 55%, then 60%, then 65%. By 2023, according to these documents, I owned only 35% of the business I'd helped build. When had I agreed to that? I searched through my files for stock transfer agreements, partnership amendments, anything that would explain how I'd gone from equal partner to minority shareholder without realizing it. Nothing. No signed agreements, no legal documents, no record of any meeting where we'd discussed changing our ownership structure. Just tax returns that slowly, methodically, edited me out of my own business. I was starting to see the scope of what Jim had done. This wasn't a sudden decision made in anger or frustration. This was a years-long campaign to legally separate me from the business while keeping me in the dark about what was happening. But how? How do you change someone's ownership percentage without their knowledge or consent? I found a part of the answer in a folder marked Legal Miscellaneous. Insurance updates, equipment registrations, routine business filings with the state. Documents I'd signed without reading carefully because I trusted Jim to handle the administrative details. Hidden among the routine paperwork were partnership amendments, ownership transfers, and corporate restructuring documents. All requiring my signature, all signed by me, all completely changing the fundamental structure of our business relationship. I remembered signing them. Just updating our insurance, Jim would say, or routine filing with the state, or modernizing our corporate structure for tax purposes. I'd signed them while reviewing job estimates or talking to clients on the phone, trusting that Jim wouldn't ask me to sign anything that wasn't in both our best interests. Every signature had been a small betrayal, a tiny step toward my own elimination. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. each one so small I hadn't felt it happening. By 4 a.m., I had a stack of documents 6 inches high, proof of systematic manipulation going back at least 5 years. Proof that Jim Davis had been planning this betrayal since at least 2019, maybe longer. But I also had something else, proof of what the business was really worth, and proof of what my share should have been. The real numbers, not the lowball figure Jim had offered in his buyout proposal. Davis & Lowe, Davis Enterprises now, was worth almost $3 million. Equipment, contracts, client relationships, real estate, intellectual property. $3 million that Jim was trying to buy me out of for $180,000. I sat on the floor of my office, surrounded by 38 years of paperwork, and felt something I hadn't felt since I was a young man starting a business with nothing but hope and determination. I felt angry. Not the helpless, defeated anger I'd felt that morning when I saw the sign. This was something different. This was the cold, calculating anger of a man who'd been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. Jim Davis thought he'd won. He thought he'd outmaneuvered the simple landscaper who was more comfortable with dirt than documents. He thought I'd take his insulting offer and quietly disappear into retirement. He was about to learn that 38 years in business had taught me a few things about fighting for what was mine. I didn't go to the office the next day, or the day after that. Jim probably thought I was licking my wounds, maybe talking to a lawyer who would tell me the same thing he'd been telling me, that handshake deals don't hold up in court, that I should take his offer and be grateful. Instead, I was doing something I should have done years ago. I was auditing my own business. Sarah brought me coffee and sandwiches while I worked, spreading documents across every surface of our dining room. She didn't ask questions, didn't tell me I was obsessing. She just kept me fed and caffeinated while I dug deeper into the financial records of Davis & Lowe. What I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the ownership percentages that had been changing without my knowledge. Money had been moving too. Lots of money. Revenue from jobs I'd managed, payments from clients I'd cultivated, profits from contracts I'd estimated and bid, all flowing into accounts I didn't have access to. The Henderson project, the one Jim had criticized me for running 3 weeks over schedule, it had actually finished early and under budget, generating a $47,000 profit that never showed up in our joint account statements. According to the client payment records, they'd paid the full contracted amount plus a completion bonus. But according to our books, we'd barely broken even. I found similar discrepancies going back 3 years. Projects showing lower profits than they'd actually generated. Client payments that were recorded at reduced amounts. Bonuses and change orders that appeared on invoices but not in our shared financial reports. Jim had been skimming. Systematically, methodically, carefully. Taking money from jobs I'd managed and hiding it in accounts I didn't know existed. But I still didn't have access to those accounts. I could see the evidence of money being moved, but I couldn't prove where it had gone. I needed help from someone who understood financial systems better than I did. That's when I remembered Maria. Maria Gonzalez had been doing bookkeeping for small businesses in our area for 20 years. We'd hired her in 2018 when our financial records got too complicated for Jim and me to handle alone. Sweet, quiet Maria, who always had our quarterly reports ready on time and never asked uncomfortable questions about business decisions that weren't her responsibility. But Maria had access to all our accounts. Maria processed all our payments and deposits. If anyone could help me understand where the money had gone, it would be her. I called her from my cell phone, not the house line that might show up on business records. "Maria, it's Rob Lowe. Could I meet with you today? I need to review some financial records." "Of course, Mr. Lowe. Should I call Mr. Davis to set up a meeting?" "No," I said quickly. "This is something I need to handle personally. Can we meet somewhere private?" There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "I'm not sure yet. That's what I'm hoping you can help me figure out." We met at a coffee shop in the next town over, somewhere Jim was unlikely to appear. Maria looked nervous, clutching a manila folder like it contained state secrets. In a way, I guess it did. "Mr. Lowe, I've been worried about calling you," she said before I could even ask my first question. "There are some things in the books that don't make sense to me." "What kind of things?" She opened the folder and pulled out printouts that looked like bank statements. "These accounts," she said, pointing to numbers that meant nothing to me. "Mr. Davis opened them last year. He said they were for tax planning, to separate different types of income." Different types of income. Maintenance contracts versus installation jobs. Residential versus commercial. He said it would make our tax filing more efficient. She paused, looking guilty. "But Mr. Lowe, some of these accounts, I don't think you have access to them." She was right. Jim had created a whole parallel financial system, with accounts and credit cards and payment processing systems that only he controlled. Money from our joint projects was being split between our shared accounts and his private ones, with the split heavily favoring the private accounts. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Maria pulled out a calculator and started adding numbers. Her fingers moved quickly across the keys, years of bookkeeping experience allowing her to work faster than I could follow. "In the last 2 years," she said quietly, "approximately $680,000 has been moved into accounts that only Mr. Davis can access." $680,000. More than I'd made in salary over the same period. Money from jobs I'd managed, clients I'd served, work I'd supervised. Money that should have been split between equal partners but had instead been diverted to Jim's personal empire. "Maria," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to print out everything. Every account, every transfer, every transaction. Can you do that?" "Mr. Lowe, I could get in trouble. If Mr. Davis finds out—" "Maria, he's been stealing from me. From us. That money belongs to the partnership, and he's been hiding it for years." She looked at the papers spread between us, then back at my face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning. But Mr. Lowe, you should know. He's been asking me to prepare financial statements that show the business is worth much less than it actually is, for your buyout negotiation." "How much less?" "According to the statements he asked me to prepare, Davis & Lowe has a book value of about $400,000. But with all the hidden assets and accounts," she paused, "the real value is probably closer to $3.2 million. $3.2 million. Jim was trying to buy me out of a $3.2 million business for $180,000. He wasn't just stealing my partnership. He was stealing my retirement, my financial security, my family's future." I drove home in a daze, Maria's numbers spinning through my head. For 3 years, while I'd been focused on doing good work and serving our clients, Jim Davis had been systematically looting our business. While I'd been proud of our success and grateful for our partnership, he'd been preparing to eliminate me and keep everything for himself. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd been so focused on hiding the money that he'd forgotten to hide the paper trail. Maria had records of everything. Every transfer, every hidden account, every fraudulent financial statement. Jim Davis thought he was smarter than the simple landscaper who preferred dirt to documents. He thought he could manipulate me with corporate speak and legal maneuvering while I stood by helplessly and accepted whatever scraps he decided to throw my way. He was about to learn that 38 years of building a business had taught me something valuable. When someone tries to steal from you, you don't just roll over and let them win. You fight back, and you fight to win. I spent that night in my office again, but this time I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was planning my next move. Maria's financial records were spread across one table, legal documents on another, and in the middle of it all was a yellow legal pad where I was sketching out my strategy. First, I needed to understand exactly what Jim had done and how he'd done it. The evidence was damning, but I needed to organize it in a way that would be clear to lawyers, accountants, and potentially a judge. The financial fraud was the most straightforward. Jim had systematically diverted money from our joint operations into accounts he controlled exclusively. That was embezzlement, pure and simple. The amounts were substantial enough to constitute felony charges if I decided to pursue criminal prosecution. The partnership dissolution was trickier. Jim had managed to manipulate me into signing documents that gradually reduced my ownership stake, but he'd done it through deception. I'd been told I was signing routine paperwork when I was actually signing away my rights to the business I'd helped build. That might be fraud, but it would be harder to prove in court. Then there was the question of what I actually wanted. Did I want to destroy Jim Davis? Did I want my partnership back? Did I want to walk away with what I was owed and start over at 65? Around midnight, Sarah appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. She set one next to my legal pad and sat down in the chair across from my makeshift war room. "You've been quiet today," she said. "Quieter than usual, I mean." "I've been thinking." "About what you're going to do?" I looked at the evidence scattered around us. Financial records showing years of systematic theft. Legal documents proving deliberate deception. Bank statements revealing the true value of what Jim was trying to steal from me. I could destroy him, Sarah. Criminal charges, civil lawsuit, public humiliation. I could take everything he's stolen and more. I could make sure he loses his house, his reputation, his freedom. Sarah sipped her tea and waited for me to continue. "But I keep thinking about Helen, about their kids, about the employees who depend on the business for their livelihoods." I gestured at the papers surrounding us. None of them deserve to pay the price for what Jim has done. "So, what are you thinking instead?" I picked up my legal pad and showed her what I'd been sketching. Not a battle plan for total war, but something more surgical, more precise. I'm thinking about justice instead of revenge, about getting what's mine without destroying innocent people in the process. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would present Jim with the evidence of his fraud and give him a choice. He could honor our original partnership, restore my ownership, return the stolen money, put my name back on the business, or I could take everything to the authorities and let the legal system decide his fate. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, about getting back what was mine and ensuring that Jim could never do this to me again. But there was one more element to my plan, something that went beyond just recovering my losses. Jim needed to understand that his actions had consequences, that betraying someone's trust came with a price even when forgiveness was offered. "I'm going to make him explain himself," I told Sarah. "Not to me. I already know what he's done and why he did it, but to the people whose respect he craves, the clients who trust him, the community leaders who see him as a successful businessman, the employees who look up to him as their boss." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How do you plan to do that?" "By being better than he is, by handling this with the dignity and professionalism that he abandoned when he decided to steal from his partner. I would present him with the evidence privately first, give him a chance to make things right without destroying his reputation or his family's financial security. But if he refused, if he tried to deny what he'd done or minimize the betrayal, then I would have no choice but to go public with what I'd discovered. The business community in our area was small and tightly connected. Word would get out. Clients would ask questions. Employees would demand answers. Jim Davis would have to face the consequences of his actions, not through criminal prosecution or civil lawsuits, but through the loss of trust and respect that meant everything to a man with his ego. "It's risky," Sarah said after I'd explained the whole plan. "What if he calls your bluff? What if he dares you to go public and then uses his position to discredit you?" "Then I'll follow through. I'll file criminal charges, sue him in civil court, and make sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of man Jim Davis really is." I looked at the evidence surrounding us. "But I don't think it will come to that. Jim's too smart and too vain to risk having his reputation destroyed. He'll negotiate." Sarah reached across and took my hand. "You know, this means you'll have to work with him again. If he agrees to restore the partnership, you'll be back in business with the man who tried to steal everything from you." "I know. But Sarah, this business isn't just my livelihood. It's my legacy. It's 38 years of work that means something. I'm not ready to walk away from that, and I'm not willing to let Jim Davis rewrite history and pretend he built it all himself. I looked around at the evidence of betrayal and theft scattered across our dining room table. Tomorrow, I would organize it all into a presentation that would give Jim Davis a choice between redemption and ruin. Tonight, for the first time since I'd seen that sign 3 days ago, I felt like I was taking control of my own destiny again. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to begin. I called Jim that Friday morning from my house phone, the same number I'd been using to coordinate with him for 38 years. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee, but she could hear every word from where she stood. "Jim, we need to talk. Can you meet me at Romano's tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock. There was a pause. "Rob, if this is about the buyout offer, I think we covered everything the other day. It's not about your offer. It's about some financial records I've been reviewing. Some things don't add up." Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of things?" "The kind of things we should discuss in person, with privacy." "Rob, you're making this sound more dramatic than it needs to be. Why don't you just come by the office on Monday and we'll—" "Jim?" I kept my voice level, professional. "Romano's. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I hung up before he could argue. Romano's was perfect for what I needed to do. Public enough that Jim couldn't make a scene, but quiet enough that we could have a serious conversation without being overheard. I'd chosen a Saturday morning because the breakfast crowd would be light, mostly older couples reading newspapers and taking their time with coffee. I arrived 20 minutes early and chose a corner booth where I could see the entrance. I'd brought a briefcase, Sarah's old one from when she worked at the bank, filled with everything Maria had given me: bank statements, financial records, transfer documentation, copies of the fraudulent partnership amendments, 38 years of evidence organized into neat manila folders. Jim walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, wearing weekend clothes but still looking like he was dressed for a board meeting. Khakis with a perfect crease, polo shirt that probably cost more than I used to spend on clothes in a month, leather shoes that had never seen a day of real work. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately noticed the briefcase. "You're really going all out with the presentation, aren't you?" "Order some coffee, Jim. You're going to need it." The waitress came over. Betty, who'd been working Romano's weekend shift since before Reagan was president. Jim ordered black coffee and wheat toast. I ordered the same, though I knew I wouldn't be able to eat. After Betty left, I opened the briefcase and pulled out the first folder. Bank statements showing our joint accounts and deposits over the past 3 years. Clean, simple, easy to follow. "Recognize these?" I asked, sliding the papers across the table. Jim glanced at them, his expression carefully neutral. "Our business accounts? So what?" I pulled out the second folder. More bank statements, but these showed accounts I'd never seen before. Accounts with names like Davis Property Management and JD Consulting Services and Mountain View Development, LLC. "How about these?" Jim's poker face slipped just slightly. A tightness around his eyes, a barely perceptible stiffening of his shoulders. "Those are separate business entities, for tax planning purposes." Tax planning. I pulled out the third folder, the one that would end this conversation one way or another. "Jim, over the past 3 years, you've diverted $680,000 from our partnership into accounts that only you control. Money from jobs I managed, clients I served, work we both did. That's not. I have the transfer records. Every deposit, every electronic transfer, every check that should have gone into our joint accounts but ended up in your private ones instead." I spread the papers out systematically, like a prosecutor laying out evidence for a jury. Each document told part of the story, but together they painted a picture of systematic theft that had been going on for years. The Henderson project alone generated a $47,000 profit that you hid from me. The Morrison account paid a completion bonus that never appeared in our shared books. The city park renovation. They paid us $340,000, but only $210,000 made it into our partnership accounts. Jim was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language, Rob, this is more complicated than you understand. There are tax implications, liability issues, corporate structures that— Stop. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but letting him hear the steel underneath. Don't insult my intelligence with corporate double talk. You've been stealing from me for 3 years, and you've been planning to cut me out entirely for even longer. I pulled out the partnership amendments, the ones he'd buried in routine paperwork and convinced me to sign without reading carefully. Remember these? Routine corporate filings, you said. Just updating our structure for modern business practices. Jim looked at the documents, and I saw the exact moment when he realized how much I knew. His face went pale, then red, then settled into the careful mask of a man who'd been caught but wasn't ready to admit it. I could have gone to the police, I continued. Embezzlement of this amount is a felony. I could have called the IRS about the fraudulent tax filings. I could have contacted every client we've ever served and told them exactly what kind of man they've been trusting with their properties. But you didn't, Jim said quietly. No, I didn't. Because despite what you've done to me, I'm not you. I don't destroy people's families to get what I want. Betty appeared with our coffee and toast. The normalcy of the moment, coffee cups and butter pats and jam packets, seemed surreal given what we were discussing. Betty asked if we needed anything else, and I almost laughed. What did we need? Honesty? Integrity? A time machine to go back to when we were young men who trusted each other? What do you want? Jim asked after Betty left. I want what was always mine. Full partnership restored. My name back on the business. Equal decision-making authority. And every stolen dollar returned to our joint accounts. And if I refuse? I closed the briefcase and looked him in the eye. Then I make some phone calls. The district attorney, the IRS, maybe a few reporters who might be interested in a story about local business fraud. By Monday afternoon, everyone in 3 counties will know what you really are. Jim stared at his untouched coffee for a long moment. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not the arrogant confidence I'd seen earlier in the week, but not quite defeat either. More like the careful calculation of a man weighing his options. The employees don't deserve to lose their jobs because of this, he said. No, they don't, which is why I'm giving you a chance to fix this quietly. And Helen? The kids? You want to destroy my family? I thought about Helen, who'd always been kind to Sarah and me, about Jim's daughter who'd just started college, his son who was getting married next spring, about all the innocent people who would be hurt if I took this public. Your family won't be destroyed if you do the right thing, I said. But Jim, if you force me to go public with this, I will. Don't mistake my willingness to be reasonable for weakness. He picked up his coffee cup with unsteady hands. How do I know you won't just take this to the authorities anyway, even if I agree to your terms? Because unlike you, my words still mean something. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 38 years pressing down on our corner booth. Finally, Jim reached for his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill, far more than needed for 2 cups of coffee and untouched toast. I need time to think about this, he said. You have until Monday morning. But Jim? I stood up and picked up my briefcase. The business reopens Tuesday with both our names on it, or it closes permanently while lawyers sort out who owes what to whom. I walked out of Romano's feeling lighter than I had in days, leaving behind a man who was finally learning that actions have consequences. I didn't hear from Jim on Saturday, or Sunday morning. Sarah and I went to church like we had almost every Sunday for 4 decades, sitting in the same pew, singing the same hymns, listening to Pastor Williams talk about forgiveness and redemption, and the power of doing what's right even when it's difficult. I wondered if Jim was in church somewhere, praying for guidance, or if he was at home with Helen and the kids, trying to figure out how to explain that the business they'd built their life around might not survive the week. Sunday afternoon, I was in the garage organizing tools when my phone rang. Jim's number. Rob, we need to talk again. Can you meet me at the office? The office? That surprised me. I'd expected another restaurant. another public place where emotions could be kept in check. There are some things I need to show you: financial records, legal documents, things that are easier to explain in person. I almost said no, almost suggested another neutral location, but something in his voice made me reconsider. He sounded tired, defeated, like a man who'd spent the weekend wrestling with himself and lost. Okay, give me 30 minutes. The office looked different on a Sunday afternoon. Quieter, obviously, but also somehow smaller. Without the bustle of employees and ringing phones, it felt less like the headquarters of a successful business and more like what it really was: a converted warehouse where two middle-aged men had been playing at being corporate executives. Jim was waiting for me in the main office, sitting behind the desk that used to be ours. But he'd moved to one of the client chairs, leaving the big chair empty. The power dynamics had shifted, and we both knew it. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began without preamble. "About the money, about the partnership, about everything." I took the chair across from him and waited. "You're right about most of it," he continued. "The money transfers, the hidden accounts, the way I've been handling the partnership structure. It wasn't the way we agreed to do things back in '86. Most of it. Not all of it, but most of it." Even now, even when caught red-handed, Jim couldn't quite bring himself to admit complete responsibility. "But Rob, you have to understand, the business world has changed. Our clients expect a certain level of professionalism, sophistication. The handshake deals and verbal agreements that worked when we were starting out, they don't work anymore. So you decided to handle that by stealing from me. I decided to handle it by protecting the business, by making sure we could compete with bigger companies that have real corporate structures and professional management." I almost laughed. "Professional management? Jim, you've been running a con game for 3 years. That's not professional management, that's fraud." He flinched but kept going. "The separate accounts, the different corporate entities, those aren't just about hiding money. They're about liability protection, tax optimization, business continuity planning. Things you never wanted to discuss because you preferred the simple handshake approach." "And my ownership percentage? Was reducing my stake from 50% to 35% also about tax optimization?" "That was—" He paused, maybe realizing that this particular betrayal couldn't be dressed up in corporate speak. "That was about control, about making sure the business could move forward without getting bogged down in endless discussions about every decision." "Without getting bogged down in my input, you mean?" "Sometimes, yes." At least he was being honest now. After 38 years of partnership and 3 years of theft, Jim Davis was finally admitting that he'd been systematically eliminating me because he was tired of considering my opinions. "So, what's your proposal?" I asked. Jim pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Legal documents, freshly printed, still smelling like toner from the copy machine. "Restoration of full partnership. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority, equal access to all accounts. Your name goes back on everything. Signs, contracts, letterhead." I flipped through the papers. They looked comprehensive, professionally drafted. "What about the stolen money?" "All funds returned to joint accounts within 60 days, plus interest calculated at prime rate." "And the employees? They keep their jobs, their benefits, their profit-sharing arrangements? Everything continues as before. No one gets hurt by this transition." I kept reading. The documents were thorough, covering every issue I'd raised and several I hadn't thought of. Jim had clearly spent the weekend working on this, probably with legal help. "There's one more thing," he said when I'd finished reading. "A personal apology. Not just the legal acknowledgement in the documents, but a real apology for betraying your trust." I looked up at him, this man I'd known for nearly 40 years. His face was haggard, like he hadn't slept well in days. His expensive clothes looked rumpled. His perfectly styled hair was messed up from running his hands through it. "I'm sorry, Rob. Really, genuinely sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but sorry I did it in the first place. Sorry I let greed and ego override nearly 4 decades of friendship. The apology sounded sincere. It felt real in a way that surprised me, but apologies don't undo betrayal, and sincerity doesn't restore trust. Jim, I appreciate the apology, and these documents look like they address all my concerns, but I have to ask, why now? Is it because you're sorry, or because I have enough evidence to destroy you? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the yard where we stored our equipment. Finally, he said, "Both, I guess. I'm sorry because what I did was wrong, and I'm fixing it because you caught me and I don't have any choice." At least you're being honest. Rob, can I ask you something? If you take this deal, if we restore the partnership and go back to working together, will you ever trust me again? I thought about that question. Could I sit across from Jim in staff meetings and believe he was telling the truth? Could I sign contracts knowing he might be planning to undermine me later? Could I build something new on the foundation of such complete betrayal? I don't know, I said finally, but I'm willing to try. Not because I trust you, but because this business means something to me. Because 38 years of work shouldn't be thrown away because one of us forgot what partnership means. Jim nodded slowly. Fair enough. I gathered up the documents and stood to leave. I'll have my lawyer review these and get back to you by Tuesday morning. Rob, Jim stood up as well, extending his hand. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right instead of just destroying everything. I looked at his offered handshake, remembering the young man who'd shaken my hand in that diner in 1986. We weren't those young men anymore. Too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. But maybe we could find a way to work together again, even if we'd never be friends. I shook his hand. We'll see how it goes, Jim. We'll see how it goes. 3 months later, I'm standing in the parking lot again, coffee in hand, looking up at our sign. It says Davis and Low Landscaping in fresh green letters. The same design we used to have, but newer, brighter, like we're starting over. In some ways, we are. The legal restoration went smoothly once Jim's lawyer and my lawyer worked out the details. All the stolen money came back with interest, $697,000 total, enough to fund my retirement properly and give us working capital for new equipment. The partnership documents were rewritten with ironclad protections for both parties. No more handshake deals, no more blind trust, but also no more secret accounts or hidden agendas. Jim kept his word about everything. The employees kept their jobs, the clients kept their service, and to the outside world it looked like we'd just done some routine corporate restructuring. Only a few people know what really happened: Maria, who's still doing our books but now reports to both of us equally, and the lawyers who helped put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Sarah asked me last week if I was happy with how things turned out. It's a good question, one I've been thinking about a lot. Am I happy? I'm not sure happy is the right word. I'm satisfied that justice was done. I'm relieved that I didn't have to destroy anyone's family to get what was rightfully mine. I'm proud that I chose restoration over revenge, even when revenge would have felt good. But happy? That's complicated. Working with Jim now is like working with a stranger who happens to look like my old partner. We're professional, efficient, respectful. We make decisions together, split responsibilities fairly, communicate clearly about business matters. But the easy camaraderie is gone. The friendship that made our partnership special for so many years, that's not coming back. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe I was naive to think business and friendship could coexist without boundaries. Maybe the professional distance we maintain now is healthier than the blind trust I used to have. Jim has been true to his word about everything. He shows me every contract before signing, includes me in every major decision, treats me as an equal partner in all respects. He's even suggested we update our profit-sharing arrangement to be more generous to employees, and he's pushed for investments in equipment and technology that will benefit the business long-term. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with something that might be regret, Or maybe just the sadness of a man who understands what his actions cost both of us. We don't talk about personal things anymore. No more stories about family. No more jokes during long drives to job sites. No more casual conversations about life and dreams and the passage of time. We work together, but we're not friends. We're business partners in the truest, most limited sense of that term. The business is doing well. Better than it has in years, actually. Maybe the formal structure works better than our old informal approach. Maybe having clear roles and responsibilities is more effective than the casual division of labor we used to rely on. Or maybe we're both working harder because we know this is our second chance, and second chances don't come around very often. I've learned some things about myself through all this. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. When I felt my life's work being stolen from me, I didn't just accept it or walk away. I fought back intelligently, strategically, effectively. I also learned that I'm more forgiving than I expected. When I had the power to destroy Jim completely, I chose not to. Not because he deserved mercy, but because destruction wouldn't have served any useful purpose. Most importantly, I learned that some betrayals can be survived and overcome, even if they can't be forgotten or fully forgiven. The young men who shook hands in that diner in 1986 believed in trust and friendship, and the power of partnership to create something bigger than either of them could build alone. Those young men don't exist anymore. They've been replaced by older, wiser, more careful men who understand that business is business, and that even the closest partnerships need legal protections and clear boundaries. Maybe that's a loss. Maybe something valuable was destroyed that can never be rebuilt. But maybe it's also an evolution, a growing up, a recognition that sustainable success requires more than good intentions and friendly handshakes. I finish my coffee and head inside to start another day. Jim's already here. His BMW is in its assigned spot, and I can see lights on in the office. We have a busy schedule today. 3 estimates to present, 2 job sites to inspect, a staff meeting to plan next month's projects. It's good work, meaningful work. Work that beautifies our community and provides good jobs for our employees and generates enough profit to support 2 families and fund 2 retirements. It's not the partnership I dreamed about when I was 27 years old, full of ambition and trust and naive optimism about human nature. But it's the partnership I have now, and it's built on a foundation of mutual respect, clear expectations, and legal protections that should prevent future betrayals. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better from the wreckage of what was broken. Davis and Lowe Landscaping is open for business again. Different than before, but still standing, still growing, still creating something beautiful from dirt and sweat, and the determination to not let betrayal have the final word. That's enough. For now, it's enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've made it this far, you know that life doesn't always give us the endings we expect, or even the endings we deserve. Sometimes it just gives us the chance to begin again, a little wiser and a lot more careful than we were before. If you're dealing with your own betrayal, your own partnership gone wrong, your own moment of having everything you've built threatened by someone you trusted, know that you're stronger than you think you are. Know that fighting back doesn't always mean destroying your enemies. Sometimes it means being smart enough and strong enough to rebuild on your own terms. Take care of yourselves, and remember, nobody deserves to suffer in silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell your story and let others know they're not alone. And there you have it, my friends. 38 years of partnership nearly stolen, but reclaimed with boundaries intact. What shocks you most? The hidden accounts or my second chance? Drop your thoughts below. I read them all. Thank you for joining me. Smash like, subscribe to our family, and turn on notifications. The next story drops soon. Don't miss it.